human resources, no, human relations course. This is our course on human relations that's going to focus on diversity, multiculturalism, and cultural intelligence. And this is part 1. Welcome. I am Professor Jessica. Quote of the day: differences challenge assumptions. Assumptions are those things that we take for true, even though we don't have evidence for them. And when we see differences and experience differences, they also challenge our assumptions, which may make these differences difficult for people. And so we are focusing on that in this chapter. How are we ensuring that we value and embrace diversity and multiculturalism as opposed to the opposite? So our first set of learning objectives or topics are: 1, to define, explain, and identify power and privilege. And in doing so, you can identify your own. Also, to provide reasoning as to why diversity is important to maintain profitability in organizations. Learning objective number 2. So even though people use the two terms diversity and multiculturalism sometimes to mean the same thing, they are different, and there are quite major differences between these two terms. So diversity, first of all, is defined as the real or the perceived differences between or among individuals. And these differences can be surface levels like race and gender or sex, maybe somebody's religion, national origin, where you're from, your accent, your socioeconomic status, right? Even though that might not always be the correct signal that we see. People might be in debt, even though they're showing flashy things, right? And so much more. And then we can also talk about deep level diversity, which are things maybe like your values and your political viewpoint, how you align politically, your culture, where you come from, etc. And so diversity is any way you and I are actually different from each other. And diversity here in the United States, which is where I teach, diversity in the workplace really tends to focus on how can we ensure that our policies and structures are designed so that we meet compliance standards, so that we don't discriminate, and so that we are not illegal in our employment decisions. Multiculturalism, on the other hand, looks at power and privilege and those differences in society, and we will define that on a different slide. But essentially it goes much, much deeper than diversity does, because it looks at systems, and it also focuses on things like inclusiveness, understanding, and respecting. And it does that from the viewpoint of unequal power in society. So when we look at diversity in organizations, what could those advantages be? Well, clearly, diversity can help companies create policies that prevent discrimination. And multiculturalism can help us gain a deeper understanding of the differences between and among people, which will help us with emotional intelligence. So one of them really focuses on that compliance piece, that diversity, and the other one, multiculturalism, is so much broader, trying to make sure that we are actually valuing others appreciating others, and also benefiting from it, right? Themselves, ourselves, as well as the organizations. More like a win win situation. So, for companies, having a diverse workforce can give us some competitive advantage, and some of them are listed on this slide. So, it can drive things such as innovation, different backgrounds, different perspectives, greater ideas, more innovation. So, similarly, we might have more creativity in our teams and in our groups because of that. Um, we are also maybe more able to serve our customers because we can understand them, speak their languages, come from the same culture. And similarly, we do that with each other, right? The more diversity we have, the better we can communicate across the board. And also, teams tend to have some greater functionality, which means that they are more productive because we are just bringing more to the table, different perspectives to the table. And so here are some of the current statistics. Companies that have gender diversity tend to outperform companies that do not by 15%. That's a big number, right? But even bigger number over here. Companies that have ethnic diversity outperform those that do not have ethnic diversity by 35%. And if we look at our final bubble over here, companies with higher diversity in the executive board achieved 53% more profit than those in the lower percentile for executive board diversity. So for those of us who like to have numbers attached, we these are some pretty hefty numbers just from diversity. Keep in mind that profit and monetary value comes from a lot of things, such as the products, the services, the markets we're in, the customers we have. So actually seeing some direct result in terms of diversity is quite magnificent. So let's chat a little bit about power and privilege. So as we have already established, diversity looks at how you and I are different from each other, right? This is the otherness uh, between us. And we're also talking, or we did talk about the fact that companies look at policies and practices to make sure that we are legal, that we don't discriminate. So we need to make sure we have consistency in our employment decisions, essentially, that everyone is treated the same. Then we have the multiculturalism that we said goes broader. And we also said that that looks at the system that we are in. And something we can talk about here is privilege or invisible privilege. And it essentially tells us that we are in a system where we have advantages or disadvantages depending on who we are. And those advantages can come from our race, our gender, our sexual orientation, right? Who we date, who we love, and a lot of other diversity factors. And one of the simple ones, more benign, is maybe you are a right-handed person, right? You're a right-handed person, and so you live in right-handed society. And I think it's about 15%, 15% or so, um, of people who are left-handed. So we are in a right-handed society, and those poor, right, 10%, 15% left-handed people find challenges constantly as they go about their day. The scissors aren't made for them, they have to get special scissors. If you drive a car, you'll know that the stick shift is on the right side of the driver's seat, not on the left side, etc. So we can talk about that being a privilege. To live in a right-handed world is a privilege for people who are right-handed. So we never think about it. We go about life, we have this advantage, and we just never think about it. And so maybe that's an easy example for us to relate to what privilege is. And so we can say that, for instance, my sexual orientation, if I happen to be straight, I can, in my office, display pictures of my husband. I happen to be a woman, right? So if I'm straight, I would have a husband. I do not, but if I did, and my children, and I can display those photos on my desk. And maybe somebody who is lesbian, gay, bisexual might not be displaying pictures of their spouses or their partners and their families. And so that is, for me, that's a privilege to be able to do that without any anxiety or stress. And of course, there's a lot of other advantages and disadvantages for race and gender. And so, as I already mentioned, it's difficult for those who have a certain privilege to actually know, because we don't reflect on it on a continuous basis. So I prompt you today to reflect on where might you have privilege, where might you have power as a result of that privilege in a system where you might not normally have thought about it. So, to relate to that, are we color blind or color aware? Here in the United States, many grew up with the saying, "Oh, I'm colorblind. I don't see color. Everybody's the same," thinking that that is a very positive or kind way of going about life. But what we know today, that that is not the right way. That is not the right approach, because that ignores people's challenges. It ignores their experiences and their needs. And by saying that we don't see that, we don't acknowledge that, we are completely disregarding these differences that people are actually living. So we do not want to employ the golden rule where we treat people the way we want to be treated. We want to treat people with the platinum rule, which says that we want to treat people the way they want to be treated. So, what's in it for me? Well, as you go about your career, know that many companies today really are focusing on being inclusive and diverse. Because of this, it's very likely that you'll get some sort of diversity or multiculturalism question on your next interview. And so think about what this means. Think about how you contribute, what you can do better, and so that you have a solid answer for yourself as a person. And also, if that happens to come up in the next selection process. And of course, in a fair and equitable society, nobody should be, absolutely not, discriminated against because of who they are. That is just not the way an advanced society should live. So here are two exercises. One, perform an internet search to find a diversity policy for any organization. What is the policy? From what you know of the organization, do you believe that they follow this policy in reality? Number two, visit the website diversityinc.com and find their latest top 50 list. I went over there, pretty cool website. What criteria are used to appear on this list? What are the top 5 companies for the current year, and what can you learn from that? In summary, diversity is important to the success of organizations. Many studies have shown a direct link between the amount of diversity in a workplace and the company's success. Diversity is the real or perceived differences that we have between or among individuals. These can include race, gender, sex, size, cultural background, and much more, both on the surface level and on the deep level. Multiculturalism is a term that is like diversity, but it focuses on development of a greater understanding of how power in society can be unequal due to race, gender, sexual orientation, privilege, etc. Power and privilege is a system of advantages based on one's race, gender, sexual orientation, or another diversity factor, like whether you're left or right-handed. This system can often be invisible to those who have it, right? Because they don't have to reflect on it, which then results in one race or gender having unequal power in the workplace. Of course, this unequal power results in unfairness, which is then illegal. So, with that, I'm going to say bye and thank you and see you next time. Take care.